Welcome to the Driven to Succeed Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Olson, and today's guest has over 1,831 transactions, soon to be about 1,840. In the last 12 months, he has 21 million in sold volume and 49 sales. He has 2 agents on his team, and his team is Team Stockwell. So Jason Stockwell from
Hey,
EXP. How you doing, Jason?
good. Really good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We've worked together in the past. I met you in my first year, which was 9 years ago now.
Yeah, I
And
remember that.
when I was on the furlong team, because
Yeah.
you and Steve went to high school together, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember that. Yeah. 96, we graduated in Red Wing and then lost connection, connected back in I don't know, 2008, maybe the recession.
All right.
And then he started mortgages. You did, or he was in mortgages already. You came and joined his team and
Yep.
then did very well there, right? You did
Yeah,
very well
yeah.
there. Yeah.
I mean, Steve was a great mentor, and a few years of being under him, I learned how to build my own team, and
Yep.
kind of went from there. And him and I just talked to him yesterday, at length again. So we go way back, but it's been work. It has been great. Because every now and then you've done as many transactions, so a lot of times also, if I got my clients looking at one of your properties buying, it's pretty nice to be able to see that on that side.
Well, hats off for, was it Elliot? We got I had a listing on Elliott Avenue in South Minneapolis. We get an offer. Brandon's got the pre-approval on it. And I look at it and I said, is this the correct closing date? Because it had to be 2 weeks, right? I mean, it
It
was
was 12 days.
from a financed offer 12 days from I said, how are we even going to get this through, get the appraisal done, and then it closed on time, that
Yeah.
quickly.
Uh,
I was impressive. Hats off to you.
without
So,
without an appraisal waiver, because it was an investment property. So
yeah. And
I
it was an
was
investment property. That was another thing. I'm like, how are they going to do that?
right.
So,
So
and you got it done in that time and it closed on the day. And I was very impressed with that. So that
well,
was,
even I was surprised when I got the PA. I'm like, hold, what did like, and
that
oh
was
well,
Candace, right? So yeah,
Candace is awesome.
she's
She's
great. She's so
she's
good.
she's
Yeah.
really good. She's been on the podcast as well. She's doing real. It's nice because she's really in the investment space too, helping buyers buy investment properties for short-term rentals. That's what she really focuses on, like the Airbnbs, the VRBOs, and so forth. And she's got this whole app now that with how it just really itemizes out like what properties and what locations would pay the most, and what do you need to do with it to get the most usage out of it and the most money. And it's pretty crazy because you can make some significant money out of it. So anyway, it's quite interesting. But going back to you, this is what we're talking about today. Is Jason, with you really, you've been through some crazy markets. The crash of '08, right? Oh
Yeah.
seven, '08. And I think you kind of made a name for yourself with like foreclosures and bankruptcies, right? And work with Fannie Mae. Um,
Yeah.
is that correct?
Yeah. When the recession hit, I was already talking to sellers, going to listing appointments, and then hearing over and over again, I haven't made my payment, or I can't make my payment, or I'm behind by this or that. And I kept thinking, wow, how is this going to come down the road when all these 3 out of 4 listing appointments, they're behind on their mortgage payment. So then I was like, oh, I better maybe try to apply at a bank or two to get in with REO. And then that worked out. And that went on for a while, and then recovered. But during that time, learned a lot about the bank owned process, the foreclosure process, flips, how to fix up houses, and then uh, rentals and all those things during that time. That was a really big learning curve there. So
Yeah, I would have to imagine. And that's where, a lot of people, I talk to people all the time, like they buy their first house and like, oh, we want to buy it. We're going to buy a next house. So it's going to be a flip, or we're going to do this. And they're like, okay, have you ever done this before? Have you ever talked to anybody about this? Because there's a learning curve to it. And we were just talking a little bit ago, and, you know, doing that when you're doing flips, you may lose 30 grand on one, right?
yeah,
And how do you recover from that?
yeah. Usually the biggest lessons are when you lose money or lose something, and that and flips, you'll lose time and money on some of them, the losers. So the only way to avoid those is to do enough to so you know which ones to avoid. But the only way to recover from losing significant money would be to, if you do lose money, is to do another one and another one and another one. That's the beauty of real estate, is there's always another one available, or there will be another one available to do, and you just have to be better at whatever the misstep was.
Right.
If it was buying too high, if it was too long on the rehab, paying to contractors too much, resale was off, whatever it was, do it better next time, fix that mistake, and then another mistake will happen, and then you just keep
Right.
refining, and you just got to keep going. And even, I've been fortunate enough to do a lot of them for clients and for myself. Still make mistakes. Uh, Still get over my head. Still take on more than I can handle, which can come back too. So start out slow. Make sure you have a mentor or someone helping you, especially if it's the first one, and then don't do what I did last year, which was buy dozens and then they sit because you don't have enough workers to do the repairs. And then of course time is money, so you lose money on those, and then you end up making mistakes, and then having to fire sale some of them and losing money. And then so slow and steady, and then don't be afraid to let go of one. That was one thing that I was always like, oh, I gotta have them all.
Right.
I'm buying
Right.
that, I'm buying that, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it. And I would have people calling and emailing, coming to my office saying, hey, can I buy that one from you for a fee? So you'd actually make money right then and there
Right.
by letting it go. And I was just like, no, I want to do it myself. I was just
Right.
really focused on that. Big mistake, because had I let some of them go, that would have been profitable at the time, because I had way too many versus hanging on to them, and then they became negative. They
Right.
lost money. So lesson learned there, even for someone who's been doing it for 20, or well, yeah, 20 years, you still make mistakes. So
Well, I love that you're saying this because most people will get up here and they'll just talk about how, good it is, or you'll see on YouTube how good it is, and like, oh, and you make all this money, and then people do getting over their head. So, by going through those issues and then understanding those mistakes and not making them again, or like buying too many of them and so forth. But like you were just saying, it just right now, I mean, like you're not a one-man show. You got to hire, plumbers and other contractors out
yeah,
to get there, and they're all backed up, right?
so slow. So I mean, shouldn't say that disparage against all
Right,
plumbers
right,
and electricians
right,
and all that,
right,
but they're busy, which is good. Good on them. And you have to have good relationships with them, and then schedule that out, and then pay. Make sure you pay. Otherwise, they will definitely not want to work with you. Uh, and just get good people, good references, and then plan on the timeline. So if you can, the speed, I think Todd Franson, he does Cash for Houses. He says speed, speed, speed. It's all about the speed on flips. The longer you hold it, the more it's going to cost you. And so the quicker you can turn it around and get it into a homeowner's possession, or have a homeowner or an investor purchase it, the better. The other thing now, we're very blessed right now with, for Minnesota, is if you're in the 400 and under, I'd say, or maybe 450 and under price point, lot of activity, lot of demand, a lot of buyer demand. So
right,
those tend to go, when you're done, they tend to sell. Even in the high end has been great actually for the last few years too. Um, but if you're starting out, you generally want to start a little lower just to make sure you're safe.
right,
If something goes wrong, you can rent the property out and turn it into a long-term rental or
right,
short-term rental.
right,
So there's always an out. Sometimes it's costly, a loser, but there's always an out in real estate.
right, right. What are your like, what are tips, or how do you find some of these properties? Like, do you have any, is there a special sauce that you do? And maybe you don't want to even divulge that information, but, like that's where a lot of people are just, scouring the internet, right? And like,
So a lot of it is relationships with past people that you've worked with. Wholesalers, there's a ton of wholesalers in our market now. And I think maybe across the whole United States, but where they're getting in, trying to get in front of a seller, get a contract signed, and then trying to wholesale that property. And then that's a very good way to do that, to get access to properties. MLS, if you see a property that's aged on the MLS, long time on the market, which maybe 45, 60 plus days, you can sometimes offer lower and get that done. Uh, and then just making sure you're raising your hand, like letting people know, like, hey, I'm investing in real estate. I remember when I started out 2003, I wasn't even licensed yet, but I got a business cards made that said I'm a real estate investor. And I just handed them out to people. I didn't even have really a dime to work with or anything. I just
Yeah.
like, I'm going to figure this out somehow, right? Just
Right.
by putting
Right.
it out there. And the, then I let people know that. And then they're like, oh, and then you kind of run into other people, another investor. And then now, next thing you know, we're able to partner together to do a deal. And then you get experience that way and learn
Yeah.
that way. But getting them is, MLS, age listings, realtors, wholesalers, investors, other investors that have too many that
Yeah.
they want to get rid of. Partnering on deals is another great way to get in, because we're providing some resource to, whether it's financial, whether it's the actual property itself, or if it's the work on the property, or if it's some in or some where it's a mutually beneficial relationship. That's a good way to get in on a deal, and then just asking, hey, can I partner on this deal? Or, hey, will you teach me? People be surprisingly, a lot of people will teach you or help you or want to help you more than you might even expect. Just asking for help or asking for the deal, working with contractors. A lot of times the electrician plumber gets the call before we do as an agent or an investor.
Right.
Well, sellers like homeowners like, well, I got to fix up this because I'm going to sell. Well, then the electrician is there
Right.
and the electrician says, well, geez, this is going to cost you $16,000, but then they look at the house and it's all dilapidated, right? Or they're just a mess. Why spend that? Why, would you be interested in selling it as is? Or what's your plan?
Right.
That's another
Right.
way too, is through the contractors, actually.
So in other words, networking with all the contractors,
Yeah.
getting in that
Yeah.
that's a
They're in the
great.
door a lot of times first
Right.
before it's kind of like realtors. Sometimes they'll talk to the realtor before they talk to you, Brandon, right? Their
Right.
buyer doesn't always call the lender. I want to buy a house. I'm not even going to look on the internet yet, Brandon. I'm only going to call you first. And then I'm really, is that happening?
Like 15% of the time, if that, probably.
Yeah, a lot of times
Yeah.
it happens, but that's certain buyers, but most of them are going to be
It's
out
an
looking first. And they're like,
Right.
oh yeah, that's right. I got to get my
Right.
loan now and I got to get my stuff going,
Correct.
So
Correct. Absolutely. Um, Now, did you get your hands dirty when you first started doing it? Were you doing any of the work yourself, like going in and doing some minor stuff maybe, or maybe you've done some electrical work in your
no,
own?
the unfortunately, I'm not skilled in that arena necessarily. I can demo, throw stuff in a dumpster. I've done that. But as far as the actual work, labor, I'm not the best at it. I could do some of it, but there's a lot of guys and gals that know what they're doing specifically in that, and they're very good at it. Pay them,
It's time
let
is
them
money.
do it.
I mean,
Yeah.
like it's I'm mechanically inclined. I grew up on a farm or helping my grandparents farm and did all that work, but I go to do something, it's going to take me twice as long to do something anyway.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
If there's some stuff you can do yourself. So if it is, if you have the ability, by all means, yes.
uh,
If especially on your first ones, if if you're like, hey, I got to pay someone to do a remodel, a kitchen remodel, and you know how to install cabinets and countertops, do it if you have the ability and time. If it's going to save you thousands of dollars from paying a contractor to do that, yes. And then that as a profit, then your profit is increased on the deal. Yeah.
mhm.
A lot of people start out that way. Another easy thing for buyers to do, tons of buyers do this. I don't know why I didn't over the last 20 years. Buy a house, live in it, do some improvements to it, sell the house.
Right.
2 years, 3 years later, take those proceeds, buy another house, that take that gain where you don't pay taxes on it, as long as there's some, 250, 500, whatever the rules are, and then put it into another house and do it again. And you can keep stepping up, or if you want to, or move to areas that you may not have been able to afford in the beginning. Super smart to do that. I never did it. I think maybe it's because we have the three kids, and it's part of it is you want a stable home maybe for them, and they didn't want to move. The other thing is buy a place if you can, to get a multifamily. If you're beginning, I would have loved to have do that in the beginning. If I could go back in time, buy a duplex, triplex, fourplex, and do that. I bought a single family home in the beginning, rented three of the bedrooms. So it's kind of like a more college atmosphere.
Right.
Uh, but that was not sustainable. That lasted a few years, and then it kind of, then I had one buddy of mine in the basement until he moved out and moved on, so
It's
that
all
would be
subsidized.
something.
Yeah, it's all subsidizing that payment, right? I mean, multifamily is a great way if you're gonna be able to move into it, sell or rent the duplex or
Yeah.
the triplex if you can find them, right?
Well, that's the
Triplexing
thing now.
laws
Those are
are
very difficult to find.
yeah,
Yeah. Not impossible, but they're tough.
they're tough, right? And they're depending on the neighborhoods and some different things
The
there,
prices
right?
have really, really
Those
gone up.
oh, we were looking at some at a client looking at some in South Minneapolis, and it's $1 million, for a fourplex. And then he's running the numbers. He's like, I don't know how I got, how I'm gonna really cash flow this,
Yeah.
because it's that payment with current rates gets to be tough on a fourplex, right? But the duplexes and triplexes are still there. You can still find them. Um, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about was, not only, I mean, you do more because because of you're an investor, and like we were talking about it earlier, that when you get into it, not only are you selling and you're getting commissions as a real estate agent, but then you start investing in your own properties, and maybe you get a couple that you buy and then you rent out, so you have cash flow, right?
Yeah.
Because you can go up and down, right? In this business, we have these ebbs and flows where you get super busy and then you're not prospecting anymore, and because you're doing all this other work, well, then all of a sudden there's nothing coming in, right?
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about like having, not only do you have you're selling some homes, but you invest in some, and then you have some flips. So that way you can kind of keep your cash flow going.
Yeah. That's something you learn over time with, with residential real estate sales, especially now with the August 17th change. There's a lot of question marks of like, am I going to make enough income, or the same, or is it going to be less, or is it maybe more in some cases? Who knows? But there's always going to be some change. There's going to be some change going forward with that, with the commission income. But I would say that one helpful thing is to take John Colopy with Remax Results actually told me this back in, I don't know, 2007 maybe, is he said buy at least one rental home every year until until you get close to retirement, and then you'll retire fine, whether the stock market does whatever it does. If you rent out those homes, whether it's single family or multifamily, you'll have appreciating asset as well as income coming in. So if you can do that, that's one thing I highly recommend, because then now you have so you have your commission income here, which sometimes can go all over the place. And then you have your rental income here, which is stable, or should be somewhat stable. Then you have your flip bucket here, where you have money coming in for buying and selling properties, where you're hopefully getting chunks of profit, which is income taxed short term or right away. And then you can do other investments too, like maybe contract for deeds, maybe partnering on some other deals or bigger deals, or maybe some commercial stuff. I mean, so real estate is just a whole smorgasbord gamut of potluck, if you will, of where do you want to go in and what can you go into. And I tried vacation rentals last year, 2023, and for me it failed. I was not doing it properly like Candace. I should have had Candace on my side at that point. So you got it, and I wasn't good at it. It wasn't something that I hired everything out, the management and all that, and it wasn't profitable. But for a lot of people it is profitable. So find the niches that work for you and that are good for you, and then that will balance the commission income that can go up and down and have great months and low months, and then who knows what the transactions are. I don't know, I saw somewhere they said there were over 6 million transactions nationwide. Now there's supposed to be like 4 million transactions nationwide. So that's a good chunk of transactions. Um, that you gotta, that's gonna be less transactions for realtors. So there's gotta be a supplemental income. You will lose potentially on flips sometimes, so be uh cautious of that. We talked about that, but I was sitting at a restaurant yesterday and the news was on, I think it was TMZ was on, and they were talking about Kanye West lost $36 million on one, I think it was oceanfront property that he was flipping or build or whatever. 36 million. So
What did he buy that thing for? 100 million?
so it happens even to billionaires, or I presume he's a billionaire, but it happens to the best even, and you get losses. So the quicker you get out of the dumps on that and move on, the better. But those things, investments, rental properties, flips, will help offset the ups and downs of commission income for sure. And I would highly recommend it. I'm happy to help. If anybody has questions on those things, I love that's you kind of develop your passion in real estate over time, and it may change too. In the beginning, it might be like I love buyers, or I love listings, or I love flips, and you change to I love new construction, and I love building myself, or I love helping buyers new construction. That's the beauty of real estate.
Yeah, and it's like anything else. You want to have like a portfolio, right?
Yeah.
So you can build your portfolio, and you got, if you're a new agent starting out, and I've had plenty of new agents that are, some of them are just killing it. They don't even know any better, right? And they're just killing it because they get out there, they're calling, they're knocking on doors, they're doing, doing different things that other people aren't doing, or people that's been in the business. I know a lot of people have been in the business for 10 plus years and they're not doing any business right now, right? Or very
Oh,
little,
yeah. Yeah.
right? And it's like,
Well,
well, let's
maybe
go back.
they built up their rental portfolio. They don't
They
have
don't
to.
have
I
to.
don't know,
Right,
but that
right.
could be part of it.
Um, they, they're just not going back to what made them successful in the first place, too. Like
Yeah.
pick up the phone, call your past clients, right?
Yeah.
Be out there. And but it's the real drivers, and this is what we're going back to the August 17th settlement. And I've already started seeing some complications coming up on files, right? And as a lender, we have to navigate, I mean, it's somebody's got to be able to pay the commissions of the buyer's agents, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of first-time home buyers, they barely have enough money for a down payment.
Yeah.
So we're trying to find down payment assistance programs and some other things to help that, right? And now it's just got to be spelled out crystal clear to like who's paying these commissions, right? And I think, it's going to be tough. Um, because there's been so much brought to it. I still believe that you need to have representation because there's so much that can go wrong in a transaction, right? And having your own representation. So you know I do think that there's going to be a little bit of a purge of some agents that aren't showing their value, where there are some definitely agents that were just that they you get some of them get bad reps, and they're like, oh, you're just a door opener, and they don't have an understanding what goes behind the scenes,
Yeah.
right? Of what does that agent actually do, right? Because a lot of times they're not bringing things to attention to the buyers because they're just handling it, right? And between you, the listing agent, and the buyer's agent, and you're just handling things in the background. So I mean, we want, the whole goal is to have a good transaction from the
Yeah.
sellers to the buyers. Um, but going through and seeing what the next, I think it's going to be a learning curve of 6 to maybe 18 months, but of how this is all going to work. But I still think in the end, maybe these commissions aren't as high as they were before because there's more negotiating in them. So as an agent, you're going to want to do more of that portfolio and, see how to make these things work. Do you do So going back to investments, do you do 1031 exchanges like with the money and
Some of them,
some of them?
not well. So, well, first on commission, some agents, believe it or not, now with this change after August 17th, I've seen are making more because instead of the buyer broker compensation on the MLS,
Right.
they're charging an amount that's
Mm.
actually higher because they've proven to that consumer, that buyer, that they're more valuable than, or they're worth that, whatever that
Right.
number is, whatever
Right.
that percentage or that dollar amount is, which is more than the offer of the standard normal offer of compensation.
Right.
So that can work to your advantage if you're really, really good. Like you have to be really, really good. You have to
Right.
really prove that you've helped the client, can help the client, show them that you're going to, what you're going to do for them. And I've seen agents blow up deals. I've seen agents miraculously save deals.
Right.
I've seen agents make it way more complicated than it needed to be. I've seen agents make it just super awesome and smooth and good for everybody, particularly the client, the buyer, you know.
Yeah.
So so whatever the, before we were just kind of like pacified by, okay, that's the number. You look at the MLS, that's the number I'm getting paid, whatever, right?
Right.
Done.
Right.
Now it's a lot more, and I have to convince you if you're the buyer, hey, this is what I'm charging and this is why, and then you have to believe that, buy into it, and then prove that.
Right.
I can offer you 100% cancellation guarantee. Like, hey, if I'm not doing what I say I'm going to do or providing value to you, why would you want to work with me, right? So there's all kinds of things you can do as an agent to help set yourself up for a good situation in that by offering the client a lot of the services. As far as exchanges, 1031 exchanges or any exchange, yes, but I've only probably done those myself twice
Yeah. Yeah.
because you're not technically you're not allowed. So a lot of people think, oh, I'm Brandon, I bought this house, I'm flipping it, I'm taking that profit. I'm going to make 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, whatever the number, 20,000, and I'm going to exchange it into another flip. Well, if you read the rules on exchanges, you're not allowed to do flips as use an exchange tool for flips. It has to be for holds. And the IRS leaves it pretty vague as far as how long that hold time is, but general rule is the longer the better. So if I'm holding it as a long-term rental, I'm renting it for years. If I'm holding it for a short-term rental and it's a short-term rental for years, the longer the better. But if I'm just holding it for 6 months, flipping it, taking that profit, and then I'm really risking getting audited or having some issues if I'm flipping and doing an exchange. I know people do it, I've seen it done, but you're rolling the dice on that. So
Well, I'm glad that you pointed that out because I get, as a lender, I get that question a lot, and I'm not on that side. I'm like, well, I'm not your accountant, number one. But understanding how that works is, yeah, so it's not made for flips.
yeah, it's not now. There's no one that will they'll let you go through with it,
Right.
like flip or exchange a flip into another flip, but there's no one being like, oh my gosh, time out, this is.
Right. Right.
So I think they're just saying, here's a waiver, we're not going to,
Right.
not going to take any responsibility for this, but we'll close the transaction. Or no one is there to, it's not like a police stopped or anything like that, but it is,
But it opens you up to the
yeah, if
IR.
you ever get audited or ever get looked at, then they're going to look at that and say, okay, that's not allowed. So it's better to, unfortunately for flips, that's income. So that's going to get taxed at the rate of whatever your income is. So if
Hmm.
you're taxed at a very high rate and you, Brandon, let's say I pitch a deal to you and you're taxed at a super high rate, the top rate, and I'm pitching a deal to you and I say, Brandon, you could make 10 grand on this flip after you do the work and sell it and all that. And you're doing that and it's going to take you 6 months. And you're thinking,
Right.
wait, okay, not to minimize $10,000, but
Right.
6 months of time, effort, energy, risk, and then you're taxed at the highest rate. So you're actually only profiting half of that.
Right.
Is that worth you to do that deal? Right.
Hmm.
Which you'll probably be like, I don't know. I don't think
Right.
that's, unless there's auxiliary income that can come from that somehow,
Right.
that may not be the best one to take.
Sure.
So that's why when consumers and the public and people look at it and they say, oh, flippers or these wholesalers, they're stealing these houses from consumers. Well, yes, there's always bad apples, but generally, when you look at the numbers, if I buy a house, if you're an investor and you buy a house for 200,000 and then you fix it up and then resell it for 300,000, that's not $100,000 profit. Even if I said I'm spending, let's say I'm spending 30,000 on the rehab. Well, now I have 230,000 into it. I'm selling it for 300,000. You'd think, oh my gosh, she's making 70 grand on one house.
Right.
No, no, no. It's half of that, because by the time you hold it, pay taxes, insurance, interest on the money, the commissions on the side, the closing costs, you're, if you can walk out of there with a profit of 30,000, you've done great.
Right.
That's why the margins look on the surface, they look like incredible, but in reality they're
Yeah.
much, 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 much smaller, as you can imagine, and you've
Right.
seen probably. So
Oh yeah. I
yeah.
mean, and I've said this time and time again, because you got people that are like, oh, the real estate agents. I mean, everything's, you got the Zillows of the world. I got, all the videos and everything on there. I can do this all myself. I can do it all, right? My own, or open doors, and
Yeah.
right. You do those programs. And they're like, well, what did the agent do? And again, we go back to like, oh, they got paid this amount of money. Like, you just nailed it, right? How much gets taken out of it? Where's it all going? It's no, I didn't. That's the gross number.
Yeah.
After it's all said and done, after you take, I mean, first of all, taxes, and then, there's fees that you have to pay to the broker, and, where did you get it from? I've seen, 35% that like, oh, this lead came from online, and they took 35% of it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy numbers, right? And it's like, oh, they have this platform, they spend $400 a month for this, and it adds up. And then you're self-employed, right?
Yeah.
Do you have your own insurance, right? Do you have a
Oh yeah,
retirement plan?
insurance, which is skyrocketed, by the way, if you haven't noticed. Homeowners auto is all skyrocketed in across the nation, I think, in Minnesota. And the other thing to think about is too is if you're taking a pretty big risk, because you're buying a single family home, which you've never lived in it, so you don't know every detail about that house. So you may have sewer line that's bad. You may have an electrical problem that you don't know about, or a plumb. Like you inevitably, you see it on HGTV, but you inevitably discover something unexpected that's going to eat into the timeline and or the profit or the cost of the home.
Right.
So it's not for everybody, but it is a good avenue to add value to the property and make income while you're doing it. And the other thing is, I've seen sellers do this. If you're an agent watching, you've seen sellers way overdo it on certain things when they're going to sell a house, and then miss the mark completely. So I can't tell how many times you go into a house for a listing appointment, you meet with the clients and the sellers, and then they tell you, well, we're thinking of doing this, for example, and it might be like putting new countertops on their kitchen cabinets, or new quartz, whatever, super expensive, beautiful. And then as you're in the house, you're looking around, and you don't want to minimize, they have a good
Right.
intention, but
Right.
you're thinking, and you got to explain this politely and kindly to them, is you are wasting that. Almost whatever you're spending on that is going to be down the drain, because it's not congruent. It doesn't match the rest of the house. So it's usually, unfortunately, unless it's a really big issue, safety wise or health wise or structure wise, but it's usually an all or none proposition, meaning you go in and that kitchen is going to be all done, whether that's enameling the whole thing, ripping the cabinets out, whatever. You're doing all of it, or you do none of it. There's very few times where, other than painting, I would say is the number one cheapest way to improve a property, is paint and flooring, and light fixtures, reasonable costs and all that. But you'll miss the mark, and flippers will do this too. So you'll go into an investment property to flip it, and you'll go crazy on certain things that you think will improve the value, but they don't. And then you'll miss it on something else that doesn't. So the kitchens and baths are huge. Really pay attention to the space. How's the flow? The bedrooms and the bathrooms and the primary suite. Those are all the numbers of those, right, are big. And the layout, the functional obsolescence is the word. Someone will go, I had one recently, and they added a bedroom and finished off the lower level, but it was totally not functional. Like, so it almost would have been equal. The result sale price would have been equal if they had painted the floors, painted the walls, and left it unfinished than what was done. So lean on other people, lean on agents, lean on designers, get opinions from other people before you start a project, and then brainstorm on that, even if it takes you an extra week to get the ball rolling, because you'll need to know what is going to get you the best sale price, or the best desired, or the best sale for that property.
Yeah. I
Not
mean,
just, and the quickest sale too.
right.
Anyway,
And no, that's perfect because you are right. There's so many people that they were like, oh God, these are laminate cupboards. We need quartz in here, right?
yeah,
Like, what about the paint on the walls, the carpet, and
or the
that
wallpaper
minimal
itself. I
stuff?
mean, there's,
Yep.
um,
And if you just do the right margin instead of, I mean, you put quartz in or, granite in, and that gets costly. And if it doesn't match everything else, if you didn't paint the cupboards, right, on top of it, you're just going over, it's gonna look out of place as well, right? Long story. I shouldn't say long story. What I wanted to talk about. So one last thing I wanted to close up with is you had mentioned something about the new contract for deed rules, and you've gotten a couple of contract for deeds, right?
yeah.
Done a few, or probably over your career. So what are the new rules as of August 1st with the contract for deeds in Minnesota?
Well, so August has been a big month for real estate, right? It seems like a huge month for real estate commissions. August 17th, August 1st, there's a bunch of new laws, and a contract for deeds was one of them. Again, some bad apples in the mix. So mostly, generally speaking, contract for deeds have been a very valuable tool since, gosh, I don't even know how long. All right, I mean decades, right? Of have they been utilized for buyers to buy a home because of some circumstance they won't fit into the lending box of a mortgage lender. Could have all kinds of reasons, right? Number of reasons, but they have the income, the to do it, the money to buy a home, and the desire to own a home. Uh, but the laws that change now are more, and they get protection for the consumer, which is usually the premise for most of these changes, including, I think that's what they were arguing about this commission, whether you argue both sides of it, but the the premise was it was better for the consumer. So their new law on contract for deed is that buyer has 10 days to review the contract, which makes sense. Kind of like the association HOA rule in Minnesota. If you have a common interest community or an association, you get 10 days to review that. If you see something in there you don't like, you can get out. You're not obligated to that, um, which is a good thing. So they can review it, make sure they know exactly what their payments are, what their payoff is. The balloon payments have been an issue. So they are making sure it's very spelled out that you have a balloon payment in there. Uh, and then renewals, so that the goal is to prevent people from losing their house by not making a payment as they would if you go through a mortgage. When you pre-approve someone for a mortgage, your part of your job, and I'm not a loan officer, but is to, hey, this is affordable, and it isn't going to put them in a situation where they're going to not be able to make a payment and lose the house, right?
Got it. So
That's what they're trying to do for contract for these.
right on.
More onus on making sure that this buyer can sustain this, and it isn't 6 months down the road, heaven forbid, crazy stuff happens, job loss, death, and all those things. I mean, that's going to affect any
Right.
buyer or potentially, but in a normal situation, they should be able to continue making payments and afford the home without losing it. That's the rule. So
So
10
they
days to review it, longer term to cancel. So you can't just cancel the contract and then they're out in 60 days. You have to give a 30-day notice to cancel, and then there's a 90-day cure prop. Whereas in mortgages, it's usually 6 months
right.
for redemption here in Minnesota. So they're modeling it more after more conventional loans where the consumer gets more opportunity to review what they're doing, make sure it's right. And then secondly, if they do get into trouble, they have more time to cure that problem. Right. So,
Got it. So they essentially buttoned up made the contracts easier to understand as a consumer.
yep. They've created
And
a new page or new
yep.
disclosure.
And um more because I've seen them over my time that it's like, okay, you missed two payments and they can just that you're out but you put 20% or 10% down, right? And in some cases 20% down. Well, now they just captured all that money and you were out. So, and I mean, there were some really bad contracts that I've seen in the last
Well,
10
and shorter
years.
term ones too. So, if they're like a 1 year deal, you gotta just make sure if you're entering into a contract for deed, you have a client that's entering into a contract for deed, make sure that they know that the term of that, the timeline of that, and that have a plan. So I remember I said there's always an out in real estate. Sometimes you do lose money, but there's always an out. So the out on a lot of those, if it starts to go bad, is you sell, right?
Right,
If you're unable to refinance, then you sell and then recoup, hopefully, your down payment or some of it or whatever you can of it.
right,
Just as if I got a loan with you and something goes wrong and I have to, can't make the payments, so I will want to sell to recoup that probably at some point versus just letting it go and losing
right.
losing everything I've put into it. So that's the premise of it. And I don't know, the investor to investor, I think is still to be figured out. If it's an LLC to an LLC, I think some of that stuff may apply, some of it may not. Um, if it's like, hey, I'm financing, or you're going to finance me on a contract to do a house flip, that happens too. And I think that's different because I'm not going to live in the property. I'm an investor in I'm just going, I'm not, it's not my primary residence. I think a lot of these protections are for homeowners that are residing in the property, that is their home and they don't have another place to go to,
Right,
right? So
right,
but the idea with contract for deeds is you want a win-win, right? So they're doing a contract, the consumers doing a contract for deed for some reason. The goal is to either they pay it off or they refinance at some point, right? So in they already own it at that point. They own the property. They're making the payments, so then it should be theoretically easier if they, as long as they have income and assets and things like that, they can refinance at a later time, as long as whatever caused them not to be able to get a conventional loan at that time they're doing a contract has changed to make it so they can, whether that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, to get a loan and refinance out. And some people would move at that point too. They just want to move. It's a
right,
step up.
right.
So anyway, but they've made the rules so it's better for consumers, which is a good thing. So
Good.
yeah.
Awesome. One last thing I wanted to close out on. I know I already said that, but I was watching your video on Zillow, and you had brought Katie and your wife,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and she had said what kind of was the rock or the stable of your business is that how you are so empathetic with buyers and sellers, and you can put yourself in their shoes. And this whole conversation, I can totally get that because you've been, from on the investment side to flips where you lost money to you've made mistakes and you learn from them. So you've been there and you know it. So I wanted to give a shout out for that because I built my business on really being good with my buyers, with my borrowers and on the loan side of being empathetic, being in their shoes, and then the sellers too. Because if things happen, right? Mistakes
Yeah.
happen, things happen. Um, and a lot of times they're out of your control and you got to look at like how is this going to affect not only the buyers, they put a 60-day notice in, right? Sellers, they're buying a new home, they need to close on the same day, something like that. So you always want to be looking at all of that stuff. And and I made a really good habit of always making sure that cross the t's and dot the i's when we go into a transaction, and not even with people that tell me, oh, I got an 800 credit score and I see a bank statement that's got 80,000 in the bank, but they haven't got me all the rest of the stuff. Well, they want to go put an offer on a house tonight. They don't have everything, right?
Yeah.
It's like, you just know there's something that, oh yeah, grandma gave us this cabin and we got taxes on this. Well, what if your DTA was already at 49, right? With their current house, with the new house. Now you got a cabin with taxes and insurance, that you didn't even know about. They didn't tell you about it.
Yeah.
So you always want to do that. But being being empathetic in in that video was pretty good. So
Well, pro tip for consumers, and I would say, and even with agents, where the more information, the better that you're allowed to disclose without harming another party. But if the more information you have on a borrower,
right,
good or bad, right?
right,
So don't hide stuff as from a lender, because they will probably find out before, and it might be ugly at that time. Versus if you disclose in the beginning, you have a chance of probably figuring out a solution, right?
100%.
And then as far as I got into foreclosures partly because I said I was meeting people that were in foreclosure. Well, I went through foreclosure myself early on.
Yeah,
I got into an investment property, learned the hard way, and got foreclosed by Countrywide at that time. And that was devastating. But it really, when you get down in the valley, you have to retool and think, how in the world did this happen?
right,
And B, how can I rebound and figure this out? And it forced me to find ways and work hard to get out on a basis of not using lending credit that was so easily available pre-recession,
right,
because no one would touch me then.
right,
So I had to save up and buy and do it that way, which was actually very beneficial long term,
right,
because you learn the hard way there. And then when you're looking at houses to flip, or you're potentially flip or to sell, is if you look at like, hey, how would I set this up if it was me living here? Because most of us are very similar, even though we have a lot of differences, but we're very similar in many ways. So if you're thinking, well, I would live this way, or I would have it this way, or I would make this and this would be nice, that's probably three-quarters of the population. They're going to want the same thing. So you put yourself in their shoes. Same thing when you're buying a house. You're with a buyer, you're showing a buyer houses. You obviously have to assess their needs, but also don't be afraid to put your opinion in there at times, because you've seen 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times more houses than that buyer has. So you know more than they do. So you might see, hey, you know what? I don't know if I would, you know, want this house because of X, Y, or Z, or I don't know if I like that about this house. For you're thinking resale, obviously too, for that. And same thing with sellers. What would you do to maximize the profit, minimize the cost to sell it? You know what I mean? In the timeline. So if you put yourself in their shoes, 99% of the time, that's going to benefit them and you, because it'll make the transaction smoother and easier. Plus, you're showing your value, and it becomes what we would want, which is a win-win for everybody. So, yeah.
yeah. Well, Jason, I want to thank you for coming on the show. Your wealth of knowledge, you've been through it with, getting close to 2,000 transactions over
Oh,
probably the next year and a half or so. But anyway, thank you again. If any of you have any questions, if you're an agent too and you're watching this and you're looking and you got some experience, you'd like to join uh, Jason's team, give him a call. And
yeah, for
but
sure.
otherwise, like and subscribe. Contact Jason with any questions. Thanks again.